Sentencing day for Harvey Weinstein. As we've been reporting, the disgraced Hollywood mogul was sentenced to 23 years in prison by Judge James Burke. Weinstein must also register as a sex offender. Fordham Law School professor Cheryl Bader is joining us now. She teaches criminal law and is a former assistant U.S. attorney with the District of New Jersey. And we know you've been following this. You've been a guest with us before, and we appreciate it. What is your reaction to the sentence today?
So I think this is a day of reckoning for sexual assault victims. This was a very serious sentence, and I think it sends a message that the hammer of the law will come down hard on perpetrators of sexual violence. And I think the verdict in general, as well as the sentencing, is significant because it shows that victims will be taken seriously and that the power dynamic is one that will be considered in these cases. And a victim doesn't have to be that perfect victim for prosecutors to take, what might be a messy case and actually succeed in getting a very serious verdict.
We know he could have faced 29 years, again, sentenced to 23 years. In a situation like today, you have victim impact statements. Harvey Weinstein spoke for the first time. And, and he's talking about thousands of people could stand up for him and all of that type of a thing. What usually will the defendant say, the convicted person say? I mean, there are some people saying, wait a second, he's acting like the victim. What did you think of that?
So often the defense will give some statement about their remorse. I think it's very difficult in this case for Harvey Weinstein to really show remorse that would be adequate for the judge in a case where there's been this, significant conduct for so many years.
And he did express some remorse.
So he expressed some remorse, but it was interesting. He said that he was remorseful about the situation. He couldn't even really sort of, state what he did. He said that he felt badly about, what had happened for his family. And that's very typical. Often, a defendant will apologize to their family publicly as well as to the court and sometimes maybe victims. But it seemed like his rambling statement about, due process and things of that nature really, I think, undermined any statement of remorse here.
So we did hear from the defense attorneys, Donna Rotuno, who's from Chicago, and she called this unfair, the sentence, and too harsh. Let's listen to what she said after the sentencing.
Mr. Weinstein really never had a fair shake from day one, and I'm not here to say that he's a victim, and I'm not here to say poor Harvey, but what I am here to say is we were looking for fairness, and we didn't get it. Of course it's too harsh. It's ridiculous. Harvey feels terrible. Of course he does. This is not an easy day. We hope that this sentence will speak to the appellate court in a way that will show that this has been unfair from the very beginning. And here's just one more thing that we can add to the list of things that did not show a fair, just, and impartial trial.
And speaking of its unfairness, she noted several things, as well as one of her fellow attorneys, talking about not only in the presentation of the case, but beforehand, the media attention, protesters, Me Too protesters outside. Was this even the right venue? They plan on appealing the case. I guess there's no surprise, really, when you hear what she had to say.
Right. So, I mean, the sentence was well within the judge's discretion, right? The judge gave 20 years on the higher count, which was the Criminal Sex Act in the first degree, and 3 years on the rape in the third. And that was well within the statutory limitation. In terms of, issues of appeal, I mean, certainly they're going to raise issues on appeal. I think it's going to be hard to appeal the sentence, though, because it was within the judge's discretion. They may raise an issue that the prosecutor has brought in, other victim impact information within the context of the letter that they submitted. And there is this balance between this notion that if the jury doesn't decide a fact beyond a reasonable doubt, that it shouldn't be the basis of punishment, that does violate due process But I don't think the Supreme Court has spoken, saying that the judge can holistically look at the defense, their characteristics, and their background. So I don't think there's going to be much to appeal in terms of the harshness of the sentence. I think there will be some issues on appeal in terms of, jurors that were seated, in terms of this Molyneux or bad act evidence that the judge allowed in, some restrictions they placed on the defense. So I think we'll certainly see an appeal, but I don't think it'll be the harshness of the sentence.
And so let's talk about the district attorney, Cy Vance, and he said after the sentence, it is totally appropriate in this case to communicate to a wider audience that sexual assault, even if perpetrated upon an acquaintance or in a professional setting, is a serious offense worthy of a lengthy prison sentence. He had also said, and he had come under criticism too for, how allegations against Harvey Weinstein in the city before all of this, how they were handled by the NYPD and the prosecutor's office. So he shouldn't be gloating, right, but feeling good about it, I suppose, is the right thing to say.
Right. I mean, I think he has reason to feel good that this was a significant sentence. But I think this sends a message to victims, to the public. I mean, it'll be interesting to see, whether there's also a sea change in terms of, how this impacts the workplace. Because one of the things that didn't come up in the trial, and that's what the trial was not about, was the sort of complicity or willful ignorance of, people that dealt with Harvey Weinstein, that were in the industry, that just wanted to ride his coattails and really didn't do anything to hold him accountable. And of course, Vance has received criticism, for failing to prosecute cases that when this was brought to his attention. So I think it'll be interesting to see, if we see a sea change there.
So during today's sentencing, all 6 women who testified were sitting there in the front row, and one person said, and just that probably was the first time Mr. Weinstein saw all of them, face to face in there. Let's listen to, obviously, the 2 cases. The decision was based on the 2 cases of Mimi Haley and Jessica Mann. Let's listen to attorney Gloria Allred, who represents Haley.
20 plus 3 years. And part of the consideration in handing down a sentence by a court to a person convicted of felonies is to consider the deterrent effect. So for all those who are still preying on women, who want to engage in the high risk taking of harming women and thinking you'll get away with it, that gamble is likely not to pay off for you anymore.
Allred also represents a woman who is part of the case in Los Angeles where charges have been filed against Weinstein. What is the effect of the conviction and sentencing here in New York? What's the effect on the future of what happens out there? Will they continue with the case? Will he be extradited? How does that all work?
So I assume that they will want to continue on. They'll want to vindicate the rights of the victims in their jurisdiction. And so they will extradite him over to California at some point. I mean, it hasn't been arranged yet on that case, and the trial hasn't been scheduled, but I assume at some point it will be. I think they'll face very similar issues to what they faced here. So, for instance, I think it'll be even more difficult to find jurors that are not familiar with this case. And it'll be interesting to see whether jurors in that case will feel more empowered to return a verdict of guilt, understanding that another jury who has seen this power dynamic and these complicated relationships has found that, yes, this does constitute rape.
And just to wrap it up here, Cheryl, I think it's so important to speak about what this said for the 70 to 90 women who are alleged victims of Weinstein, and the feelings that they have had for so much of their lives or for a recent part of their lives, what it says to them and what it says to other women, as you just touched on, about having the courage.
Right. I think it says to them, you'll be heard, even if you're not perfect, that even if the relationships are messy, that we will hear you and you will have your day in court. And I think, again, this sort of reckoning that, you know, this man is going to receive significant punishment, right? He's going from this sort of red carpet treatment to Rikers Island.
And a state prison to be named.
A state prison. And it is, you know, prison is rough. I mean, you have, you know, no rights, no privacy, no humanity. And, you know, given his age and how difficult it is to live in prison, you know, he may not ever see the light of day.
Cheryl Bader, thank you so much. Fordham Law School professor and former assistant U.S. attorney for the District of New Jersey. Thank you so much for your insight. It's so helpful to us. Thank you.
It's good to be here.
Thanks.